Welcome to Downey High School's online history class. I'm your instructor, Ms. Lojano, and today we are going to be talking about political changes during the 1920s. So one of the most important political changes during this period is a movement towards isolationism. Isolationism comes from the root word isolation, which means to be alone. And in international politics, isolationism means a country has decided it wants to focus on itself for a while. So instead of focusing on working together with other countries, that country is going to say, we have our own problems. We want to focus on our own things and not worry about everybody else. And post World War I, this is the sentiment in the United States. We got sucked into this European war. It really wasn't fully our business. And let's just focus on our own things. Now, the president of the United States was not in that place. President Woodrow Wilson wanted to start an international peacekeeping group called the League of Nations, but the country decided we did not want to do that. And so after World War I, the United States decides we want to try to stay out of world affairs and we're going to refuse to join the League of Nations. The Senate is actually going to veto the Treaty of Versailles, or I'm sorry, not veto, but not approve it. And the United States actually makes a separate treaty with Germany because of the desire on the senators' part to stay out of the League of Nations. Now, below this, you can see one of the critiques of the League of Nations in this cartoon. So there's a snake right here that says international strife, which means international problems. And then there's this little bunny that's the League of Nations. And you can tell from the cartoon, right, the snake is about to eat the bunny. And essentially what people said was that the League of Nations was going to be an international sewing circle. It wasn't going to have any teeth or power, and international strife would eat it alive anyway. So why should we join? Also, some senators didn't want to give up their ability to make decisions about if the United States would go to war or not, since the United States was pre-committing to support their allies in the League of Nations. So all of that to say, the United States decides we want to focus on ourselves and we want to have less to do with other foreign countries after World War I. Now, another way that this comes out is through growing nativism. And nativism means suspicion of foreign-born people or anti-immigrant sentiment. Okay, so essentially native, right? A native is a person who is from a place, and we're saying the people who are already here are the ones we like. We don't like these new people that are coming in. And remember, we're coming off of a period of lots of immigration. 27 million people came to the United States between 1870 and 1920. And then you add a fear of communism, because remember, Russia actually left World War I early because of the Bolshevik Revolution. And that launches what we call the first Red Scare, which is where people in the United States are freaked out. What if communism is coming over here? This is, as I mentioned, because of the Russian Revolution, which occurred between 1917 and 1921. So again, you can see this reflected in the political cartoons at the bottom, right? On the left, you can see there's this guy that says Bolshevism on his jacket, and he's pulling down civilization. It says solid ground. And then down here, it says the red, let's go to the bottom first. Okay, so they're essentially saying Bolshevism is going to pull civilization into chaos. Over here on the right, you can see Statue of Liberty with a Marxist guy over here. He's got a dagger and a bomb, right? He's going to blow up liberty. So there is a massive fear of communism going on in the United States during this period. Now, this fear of communism is going to result in a series of events that we now refer to as the Palmer Raids. So the Palmer Raids were begun by the Attorney General, who targeted immigrants accused of communist or anarchist leanings. And what they're going to do is they're going to actually conduct raids on these immigrants' homes or workplaces. They detained over 3,000 people and over 500 were deported. Okay, so this is we don't want you here, communist immigrants statement, a very strong one. And you can see in this political cartoon, there's Uncle Sam with this like traitor, spy, right? We're going to throw these people out of the United States. Now, in addition to deporting people, We're also going to hit a period of anti-immigration laws or legislation. The first law that comes out to curtail or really stop immigration into the United States is called the Emergency Quota Act of 1921. And these two laws that we're going to look at, the Emergency Quota Act and the National Origins Act 3 years later, established the precedent for national immigration policy until it is changed in 1965. So this is a long period of anti-immigration policy. What it does is it sets up a nation-based quota system to decrease immigration, whereby they will admit 3% of the population according to the 1910 census. Okay, so what in the world does that mean? So let's pretend that there are 100 Italian immigrants in the United States. Obviously, there were much more than that, but let's pretend there are 100 Italians in 1910. Okay, so when we counted everybody in 1910, we determined there's 100 Italians here. What is 3% of 100? Who could do math? Okay, so that's correct, 3. Okay, so what that would mean is from now on, 3 Italians can come to the United States every year. Okay, so here's the crazy part. What if your country has never sent anyone? Okay, so say like Venezuela or something. They've never sent a person to the United States. If your country has 0 people, I mean, you know what 3% of 0 is? That's correct. It's 0. Okay, so what this essentially does is it says no new people, and the people who have been coming the most recently are the ones who are going to have smaller populations. So it's also saying we don't want Southeastern Europeans, right? This new wave of immigrants. We don't want you guys. And this is partially driven by a fear that immigrants would take people's jobs and overthrow their way of life, right? We referred to this wave as the new immigrants. These are people coming in with new religions, Judaism, Catholicism, and they are driving the wage rate down. In fact, unions were very anti-immigrant because the cheap labor was undercutting their attempts to get higher wages. And so people were like, enough. No more, we don't want you, and we particularly do not want new people. And you can see this also depicted in the cartoon. So you can see there's this funnel with European immigration. This 3% is a direct reference to the Emergency Quota Act, and we're barely letting any Europeans in, right? That is the goal. Okay, so you can see in this chart the effect of these 2 laws that we're looking at on immigration. I want to talk about the other law first. So the second law is called the National Origins Act of 1924, which is even stricter than the Emergency Quota Act. So if you recall, the Emergency Quota Act said 3% of the 1910 census. National Origins Act says that's not enough and decreases the percentage to 2%. Okay, but here's the kicker. They're going to change the census year to 1890. Okay, so let's think about what that does. We're taking the base population back 20 years, which means many of these immigrants haven't come yet, right? And so essentially what they're doing is they're going to get less immigration from new places. For example, Southeastern Europe. So Russians, Italians, any of these people who have just started coming were like, nope, we don't want you anymore. And you can see on this chart, this significant drop that happens here as we're moving into the 20s, and then also as the Depression and World War II get going and people don't want to come to a country where there's a massive depression, right? So we're going to see that drop that's really getting going with that legislation. Okay, also related to the rise of anti-immigrant sentiment is the revival of the KKK. So during this period, the KKK expands their discrimination. When the KKK formed, they were primarily concentrated on anti-Black goals. So they didn't want freedmen to vote. They were trying to prevent the mixing of the races. During this period, they are going to become devoted to what they call 100% Americanism, which means a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. That's like more of an Aryan look and a Protestant religion. So what that does is it expands harassment to Jews, to Catholics, to immigrants. right? They're like, if you don't fit this WASP situation, you are now a target of the KKK. And because of this expansion, the KKK grows substantially during the 20s. A whole bunch of new people are going to join. Some of this is also about farmers getting left behind in the growth that happens in the 20s, and they're feeling disenfranchised, and they need a method by which to let out some of their frustration. The KKK becomes that method. Okay, last example of isolationism and nativism is in the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. So you can tell from the names there, Sacco and Vanzetti. Anybody got to guess where they're from? That's right, they are Italian. Okay, so both of these guys are anarchist Italian immigrants who were accused of murder and robbery with pretty light evidence, although there is still some controversy about whether or not they were guilty. We're not actually entirely sure that they were innocent, but in the trial, they determined that both of these men were guilty, and they sentenced them to the electric chair for execution. And there was quite an uproar because people felt that this was tied into the anti-immigrant sentiment of the time and this fear of anarchy and communism, that it had come out in their trial and resulted in an unfair verdict. And so we're going to see people protesting against this as both of these men are executed. Okay, so just to recap, remember we're seeing a period of isolationism, the U.S. focusing on itself. That shows up in deporting people who are supposedly associated with communist ideals, in cutting off immigration, in the rise of the KKK, and also in this very famous trial. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Hope you guys are having a great day. Bye.